All right, so now we're going to move on to variables. I want to introduce variables early so that we can use them throughout the rest of this course because they're really important. So what is a variable? A variable is essentially a bucket, if you will, that we can put information in to store it. So think about taking a bucket, like a silver bucket, and you want to put some paper in it, right? So if we put paper in the bucket, that's the information, right? So now this bucket is just going to store the paper, and we can carry that bucket all around the land. So now if we think about that encoding point, so variables are a name, okay? Any name we want, we can name a variable. We're going to put information into it. Information we're going to deal with in this video, like I said, are the data types and numbers and floats. So we're going to put a float into the name, and now we can carry that name all around of our code, okay? So variables allow us to store information one time so we can use it many times. And they allow us to reduce the amount of repetition we do in our code. So as you start to get through this course, you'll start to see that a lot of decisions are made and a lot of features are explored because the whole point is to reduce the amount of repetition we do. We don't like to do repetition, we like to be concise. So in order to do that, we use variables, all right? So the first thing is how can we create a variable? That's really simple. We can create a variable called maybe x equals 5. So this might be a little bit confusing for you. Let me walk through it. So like I said, let's use this analogy of the bucket and the information. So when we type this line, our variable name, or the bucket, if you will, is x, okay? And the information we want to store into it is 5, right? So we have these two available, but in order to actually do the action of putting it into the bucket, we're going to use this equal sign, okay? So this is read in coding as assign the value of 5 to x. So we don't like to say x equals 5, although that is true. Once we do this, x will equal 5. We like to say x is assigned the value 5 because we can always reassign the value of x, and x is only equal to x. We can put anything we want into x. So that's how you create a variable. It's pretty simple. We just created x is equal to 5. If we run it, nothing will happen. But let's say we want to print x. If we print x, we're going to get a 5. You might be wondering why that is. So let's look at it. Like I said before, x is a bucket, and we put 5 into that bucket, right? So when we want to print that bucket x, this is basically just saying dump whatever you have into the bucket onto this portion, right? So 5 is stored into x, so when we print x, it's going to go back, be like, okay, we're printing x, what is x? And then it's going to go back to here and realize, okay, x is 5. So we're just basically printing 5, okay? So that's how we assign variables and print them. Maybe we want to do something like, instead of printing x, we print y. And oh, we got an error. Why did we get an error? Let's see. Let's read it. Name y is not defined. Name error. So yeah, we're going to get an error because we never even defined y. Uh, we define x, right? So if we print x, we're going to get a result. But we never we never put anything into the bucket of y. Y is just a bucket. We never put anything into it. So if we're trying to dump the things out of that bucket, nothing's going to come out and we're going to get an error. If we want to fix that, maybe we can assign the value of y to 7. And now if we print, we're going to get 7 because now we put something in that bucket y and we're printing it and we're going to get 7, right? So we can even do variable addition with variables, right? So we can do y plus 1. So you might be wondering, we're doing a letter plus a number. This is not a letter plus a number. Remember, this is a variable plus a number. This variable stores 7, right? So whenever we call y, we're calling 7. So this is basically saying print 7 plus 1, and we're getting 8 back, okay? So that's variable basics kind of, right? One thing we want to consider is that we don't really in our code like to use these vague names for our variables. It's not really appealing. And if you're trying to look at your code later, you might be wondering, what is X? What is Y? Instead, we can do something like my first variable. And then this one can be my second variable. We like to make our variable names as detailed as possible because if you're using a good IDE, you can make them as long as you want. And if you just type the beginning of it and press tab, you can see the shortcuts to automatically select the whole thing. So if you're wondering, why would we make a variable's name this long? We're going to have to type it every time. Well, if you use a good IDE or an environment, all you have to do is type the beginning and press tab. And not only did you save time, but you also can store specific information. So now if I come back maybe 6 weeks later and look at this code, I can be like, oh, okay, this was my second variable I created, right? It's right in the name. And if wondering what notation I used here, this is the notation we'd like to use to do variables, right? So whenever we have multiple words, we like to lowercase every word and split it up by an underscore. This is the format that coders like to use, right? So if we do that, we still get the same result because my second variable is 7. We printed that, we got 8. So how can we create a variable? I just demonstrated that. So next question is, can a variable switch from one data type to another? That's really simple. We can test it right here in about 10 seconds, right? Let's create a variable called test variable that equals 9. So remember that we put the value of 9 into the bucket called test variable that we just created. We press enter, test variable equals 9. So if we print test variable, we're going to get 9, right? So now if we want to maybe switch test variable to a floating point number, which is a different data type, remember, maybe we want to switch to 23.7. Let's see if that's allowed. And the way we can find out if that's allowed is if we get any errors from running that line. If we get errors, then it's not allowed. So make your predictions now. Is it allowed? Yes, it is. So we can switch variables between data types, okay? You only know 2 data types so far, but we're going to be going into, there's a lot more data types, and we'll be going into that in future videos. But for now, you need to realize that yes, you can switch between an integer and a floating point number for the same variable. So you can see here, test variable used to be 9, we printed it, then we switched it to a floating point number, printed the testing variable as 23.7, and everything went smoothly. So to answer this question, yes, a variable can switch from one data type to another. So the next thing we want to ask is, what is an example of the proper use of a variable? Okay, so let's look at that same thing we did before with the whole square and rectangle thing. We'll just look at the rectangle portion, right? So let's copy paste that right here. Right, so this is exactly what we did to find the area of a rectangle with dimensions 5 by 7 and the perimeter of it. But let's think about what happens if we want to change maybe the length from 7 to 12, right? So to do that, we'd have to change 12 here, and then we'd have to change 12 here. And you might be thinking, okay, this is kind of petty. We only had to change it twice. Why do we need to fix that? But if you think about it, maybe that 7, that length we encoded as 7, is going to be used a lot throughout the code. And then someone comes up to us one day and says, instead of 7 for the length, I want it to be 12. And we're going to be like, wait, we have to change the value from 7 to 12 every single time in our code. That's going to be so time consuming. But instead, we can use variables and make it so that we don't have to change this twice. We only have to change it once. And however many times we're going to use that value 7, we only have to change it once, and all of it is going to be updated. So let's look at how we can do that. Let's think about, like we just said, creating those variables, right? So let's create a variable called width and set it equal to 5, and a variable called length and set it equal to 7. So we just talked about that. They're pretty basic names for variables. We talked about putting the value of 5 into the bucket width. So yes, I'm going to assume that you guys know what I mean when I do this from now on. So we created a variable called width, set it equal to 5, variable called length, and set it equal to 7. So now let's create a variable for perimeter. So how are we going to create a variable for perimeter? Let's think about what the formula for the perimeter of the rectangle is. It's just 2 times length plus width, right? So perimeter is 2 times length plus width, and we didn't get any errors from that. Why? We defined length as 7 and width as 5. So all we had to do was put perimeter in terms of length and width. So now if we want to do the same thing as area, what is the formula for area? It's length times width, right? We do length times width, right? So now we have a variable for width, length, a variable for perimeter, and a variable for area. So now let's think about printing that perimeter, and then printing the area. So we're going to get 24 and 35 like we did all the way up here, except obviously we reversed them, but that's okay. So we're going to get 24 and 35. And now let's think about that situation I posed. What if someone comes up to you and says, actually, I want to change that 7 to a 12? Well, that's really simple now. Just change the 7 to a 12 and everything is automatically updated. And you might be wondering, why is that? So let's think about it. We set the value of length to 7 originally, right? And now we're using length everywhere throughout our code. Instead of the actual value 7, we're using length. So if we just update length once, it will update it for the rest of the code. And that is the beauty of variables. That's how we use variables. They're so efficient. It prevents us from having to go through and edit these individually. We can just edit it once as a value length, and it'll change everything. So if you don't really see the value of using variables now, you will definitely see it as you progress through this course. All right, so that is an example of the proper use of a variable. So next, we're almost done. The next question is, can we reassign a variable in terms of itself? So let's think about what I mean there. So let's say we have a variable number equals 3, okay? So now if we print maybe the value of number, we're going to get 3, right? So now maybe we want to do something and increase the value of number by 1. And you might be thinking, okay, that's pretty easy. All we have to do is change it to 4. But that kind of goes against the point of hard coding your code, right? We don't want to implicitly, or actually explicitly change the number. That defeats the purpose of using the variables. So something we can do, we will talk about shortcuts in a second, but we can just do number equals number plus 1. So this is kind of like a recursive type of thing. So we have number equals 3, right? If you're a little bit mathematic and you might be thinking of this in terms of math, this might be confusing for you. If you read this like an equal sign, remember I said we don't want to treat it as an equal sign, but if we do, we're going to get 3 equals 3 plus 1. 3 equals 4. That's obviously not true. 3 cannot equal 4. But if we read this the way I wanted you to read it, for the variable number, we're going to assign number plus 1. So for this variable number, which is a variable, although we already created, it's the same bucket. Let's put the previous value of number and add 1 and store it into number. If we press enter, we're going to get 4, right? So all we did here was we set the variable number equal to 1 more than what it was previously. That's this notation. If you're too dead set on thinking of it like a mathematical expression, this might get confusing for you. But I guarantee as you go through this course, you'll start to get used to understanding that this is not a mathematical expression. This is an assignment to a variable. So if we're assigning the value of 3 plus 1 to a number, we're assigning number equals to 4 now. When we print number, we get 4. So to answer this question, yeah, we can reassign a variable in terms of itself, like we just did over here. We reassign number to be 1 greater than itself. So what are the shortcuts? Well, before we do that, let's think about all the things we can do. Instead of doing 1, let's do 2. So if we do minus 2, we're going to get 1. 3 minus 1 is 2. Maybe we can do times 2. Yeah, we get 6. Maybe we can do divided by 2. Yeah, we get 1.5. 4 divides. Yep. Mod. Yep, we get that too. Exponents. And yeah, so we get all of them, okay? We get every single operation using this format. But if you remember what I just said, this does kind of seem repetitive. We have to type in number twice to do something as simple as, increasing it by 1 or increasing it by a factor. So there are shortcuts, and I will demonstrate those right now. So using the same variable, number equals 3, the end thing we're going to do is print number. Print number, right? So let's think about it. So now there are shortcuts we can do. So instead of doing, like I said, number equals to number equals to number plus 1, which it will get us 4, we can do something even shorter. We can just do something called number plus equals 1. So this is a shortcut for what we just did up here. All it's doing is saying, take number and increase it by 1, right? So if we make it 2, we're increasing it by 2, return 5. We can even do that with the minus sign, we're decreasing it by 2. Do that with the multiplication sign, we're multiplying it by 2. Division sign, we're dividing it by 2. floor division sign for floor dividing it by 2, mod sign, we're taking the remainder when divided by 2 and setting it equal to number, and then we can do the exponent sign. So this is a shortcut, and yes, you will be using this a lot. This is really helpful. When we get to things like control flow, you'll see how this is really useful. All right, so to answer this question, what we did, I just demonstrated all the shortcuts. So the last thing I want you to do is pause the video and see if you can do this exercise. It's a pretty short one. So all you need to do is create a variable called side and set it equal to your favorite number, all right? And then create another variable called volume that calculates the volume of a cube with side length side, that variable you created, all right? So pause the video, do that real quick, and I'll give you the solution. All right, I'm assuming you paused it, and this is how we do it. So we create a variable called side, okay? Side equals, or we're gonna assign something to the side, and my favorite number is 22, so I'm gonna assign side equals to 22, all right? And now we're going to create, like it says, a variable called volume. And we're gonna calculate the volume of a cube with side length side. If we think about the formula for the volume of a cube, it's just the side length to the power of 3, or cubed. So if we want to do side cubed. So now to make sure we're actually getting the right result, let's print our volume. And indeed, we do get 22 cubed, right? Maybe you don't know that's 22 cubed. Maybe let's do something simple like 10. So now we get 1,000. So if we have a cube with side length 1,000, the volume of it will be 1,000. So this is an example of how we use variables to do something, if you think about it, for real world purposes. So just to recap, we talked about numbers, integers, floats, operations, how we can find the types. We talked about the print function. We talked about all these different operations, order of operations, variables, how to create them. We can use map to manipulate them, how to print them. We can change them from different data types. We can use them for real world purposes like we did here that reduces code repetitiveness. We can reassign them. We found shortcuts for that. And we just did this example. So if you were able to finish this video, which was like 51 minutes long, props to you. This is just the beginning, and we're going to get really deep into Python, and I hope that you enjoyed this video and you're ready to learn. Next video, we're going to be talking about strings, so stay tuned.